What happens when a billionaire deal hinges on a single ID card, and the man holding it decides it's not worth picking up? She walked in with grace, walked out in silence, and left behind a corporate empire in ruins. This isn't just about money, it's about dignity, and how one quiet woman shattered a glass ceiling without saying a single harsh word. You won't believe how it ends. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story, it is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. The sunlight reflected off the towering glass facade of Jefferson and Rowe Financial in downtown Chicago, the kind of building that sparkled with silent judgment. Its sleek automatic doors whispered, open and closed, like secrets being exchanged between the powerful. Inside, the marble floors were polished to a gleam, every surface pristine, every glance calculated. And into this world stepped an elderly black woman named Ms. Eloise Gardner, dressed in a neatly pressed lavender suit, her hair coiled in silvery waves, and her posture proud despite the tremor in her right leg. She carried a black leather folder under one arm and walked with the aid of a polished wooden cane, each step, careful, measured, echoing with dignity and purpose. Her shoes, low-heeled and sensible, clicked faintly across the marble tiles, announcing her presence like punctuation in a silent room. At the reception desk, a young woman with a headset glanced up briefly, her smile fading as she caught sight of Eloise. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone neutral, already anticipating that this woman must be lost, confused, or both. "I'm here to speak with your senior investment officer," Eloise said gently. "My name is Eloise Gardner. I have a 10:30 appointment." The receptionist blinked. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and she gave Eloise a slow once-over, as if confirming that this petite woman in vintage attire didn't match her idea of a corporate client. "Do you have an ID?" she asked. "Of course." Eloise opened her folder with practiced grace and handed over a government-issued ID. The receptionist took it, hesitated, and then handed it off to a man who had just emerged from the elevator, tall, sharp suit, blue eyes, scanning Eloise like she was a misplaced item on his schedule. "That's not necessary, Amelia," he said, glancing at the ID and then letting it fall deliberately onto the marble floor. The sound was louder than it should have been. Cold, final. "I'm Derek Vaughan," he said with a dismissive smile. "I'm afraid there's been some mistake. We don't usually take walk-ins for executive-level consultations. I'm not a walk-in," Eloise replied softly, bending to pick up the ID. "I was invited. You may want to check your calendar again." Derek didn't flinch. Even so, this meeting, if it were scheduled, would typically require documents, financials, business credentials. "We have standards." Of course, Eloise said again, this time without warmth. "Perhaps I came to the wrong place to be seen clearly." By now, others had begun to watch. A pair of interns at the coffee bar paused mid-conversation. A security guard shifted uneasily at his post, and Derek, perhaps sensing that his tone was being scrutinized, tried to pivot with corporate charm. "Look, Ms. Gardner," she said, steady. "Mrs. actually. But Ms. will do just fine. Mrs. Gardner." He continued, "Perhaps a more community-oriented branch might be better equipped to support your needs." "My needs?" she asked. "Yes." You understand? Certain profiles fit our risk model, others not so much. She stared at him not with shock or indignation, but with something far more dangerous understanding. She'd seen this before. She knew what lived behind polished smiles and coded language. I see, she said, slipping the ID back into her folder. So just to confirm you're turning me away, I'm suggesting alternatives. Thank you. I'll be sure to pass that along to my daughter. Derek paused. Excuse me. She'll be disappointed. She's the one who suggested I bring the investment portfolio here. She wanted her firm's retirement assets managed by someone reputable. Her words, not mine. And your daughter is. Eloise smiled gently. Cameron Gardner, CEO of Helios Renewable Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it. Derek's face changed. Slightly. Enough. The room went still again. A coffee cup clinked softly behind them. One of the interns widened her eyes and mouthed, "Oh my God." Eloise leaned lightly on her cane, her voice now smooth with steel. She mentioned your firm, said you were shortlisted, but I believe I've seen enough. She turned. Her steps were slower now, but each one carried the weight of generations. As she moved toward the glass doors, a murmur spread across the lobby. Someone behind Derek muttered, "That's Helios's founder's mother." Another voice whispered, "She's on their board. Silent investor, I think." And still, Derek stood frozen, the realization descending like a curtain call he had just thrown away a billion-dollar opportunity with the flick of an ID card. Outside, Eloise paused at the curb waiting for her ride. The autumn wind tugged at her coat, but she didn't shiver. Her phone buzzed a message from Cameron. "Mom, did you get a chance to stop by Jefferson and Rowe?" Eloise smiled. She typed slowly, with intent. Yes. It was illuminating. "We should talk tonight about other options." As she tucked her phone away, a black town car pulled up beside her. The driver, a young Latino man with kind eyes, jumped out to open the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Gardner." "Good morning, Marcus." "Thank you." As she stepped inside the building behind her, gleamed in the sunlight, flawless on the outside, fractured within. And though she didn't turn to look back, she knew the doors were still whispering open and shut behind her. But the real closing had already happened. And it wasn't made of glass. The morning after Eloise Gardner's quiet exit from Jefferson and Rowe Financial, the building remained unaware of the seismic shift it had narrowly escaped. But in a quiet townhouse in Bronzeville, Chicago, Eloise sat at her breakfast table with a mug of ginger tea in hand, her fingers gliding over the cool surface of a tablet. Her granddaughter's voice played softly in the background from another room, online school in session. The world outside hummed with the ordinary, but Eloise's mind moved with extraordinary clarity. She opened her inbox and began reviewing the portfolio documents Cameron had sent over late last night. Helios Renewable Technologies wasn't just a company, it was the product of generations of persistence, perseverance, and pain. Cameron had built it on her mother's blueprint, but she'd inherited her grandmother's spine. The two women, one weathered by history, the other blazing new trails, had created something bigger than either of them alone, and they'd nearly handed part of that legacy to a man who tossed an ID like garbage. Across town, Derek Vaughn strutted into Jefferson and Rowe, coffee in hand, humming to himself. His inbox was bloated with unread emails, but nothing he couldn't brush through. He loved Mondays. They made him feel superior, always a step ahead of everyone else. He hadn't given Eloise another thought. To him, she was just another no-name walking into the wrong room. He clicked open a new LinkedIn notification and chuckled at yet another post praising his discernment. He tapped out a response to a colleague hard to maintain brand prestige when anyone off the street thinks they qualify. Gotta keep the standards high. He didn't notice that his assistant Olivia, who had seen the encounter the previous day, flinched slightly when she walked past his open screen. At noon, Cameron Gardner sat in her corner office at Helios headquarters, glass walls reflecting the skyline. She had just finished a video conference with the European Sustainability Division when a message pinged from her mother. "Let's talk tonight. Don't sign anything until we do. There's more to that firm than you know." Cameron didn't need a second message. She closed her laptop and buzzed her chief of staff. "Pull the Jefferson and Rowe files. I want everything, especially anything referencing Derek Vaughn." The staff, long accustomed to Cameron's precision, moved like a machine. Within 2 hours, she had access not only to marketing decks and contract drafts, but also to casual email exchanges that had passed through the public business accounts. Most were banal, but one thread caught her eye. It was an internal conversation, dated a few weeks back, subject line client fit, Helios Partnership, the sender Derek Vaughn. "I'll do the dog and pony show. But let's be honest, these DEI darlings aren't real players. They talk big about green energy, but they're mostly media-friendly fluff. Play nice, close the quarter strong, then drop 'em in Q2. Cameron's hands froze over her keyboard. Another response from a colleague added, "She's good PR. Use it. But keep the real numbers with our legacy clients." She stared at the screen in disbelief, not because she hadn't suspected this sort of thing happened, but because they were dumb enough to document it. She forwarded the thread to her legal team with one sentence: "I want to know if this qualifies as grounds for breach under Clause 12.5, Ethics and Representation." That night, Eloise joined Cameron at her home office. They sat together on a leather sofa, the city lights outside casting gold shadows on their matching high cheekbones and dark, determined eyes. "I knew there was something rotten under that shine," Eloise said, watching her granddaughter's jaw clench tighter with each forwarded email. "You were right as usual," Cameron muttered. "I didn't need them to like me," Eloise said. "I just needed them to show themselves." And they did. Cameron exhaled. "The contract isn't finalized yet. I can walk away clean. No penalties. But it'll delay the funding cycle for the South Texas wind farm." Eloise placed her hand on her granddaughter's knee. "Cameron, we didn't build this so we could hand it over to people who smile at you while sneering at your name in private. We built it so we could choose." Cameron nodded slowly. "I'll find another bank. One with integrity, or at least enough sense to pretend convincingly." Meanwhile, inside Jefferson and Rowe, Derek was celebrating his latest client, when a logistics firm he'd charmed over lunch. He didn't notice Olivia slipping out early, or that his name had quietly made its way onto a short, internal list titled High Risk Brand Liabilities. By Wednesday, Helios had pulled all pending proposals from the firm. Jefferson and Rowe's board received a formal notice of withdrawal, citing ethical misrepresentation and lack of cultural alignment. The email came from Cameron's general counsel, but was signed by Cameron herself. Derek received the news 2 hours later via a terse message from senior management. At first, he dismissed it. "Probably overreacting," he told himself aloud. "They'll come crawling back once the media gets distracted." But the media didn't get distracted. By Friday, whispers of the withdrawn partnership were buzzing through industry newsletters. A green tech startup had pulled a $1 billion partnership from a major financial firm. Sources cited internal misconduct and incompatibility with ESG values. Jefferson and Rowe began hemorrhaging social capital. And Olivia Shee had taken screenshots of Derek's emails just in case. Not out of vengeance, but out of wisdom. Women like Eloise taught her silence is not submission, it's strategy. In 1 week, Derek Vaughn went from the firm's golden boy to its cautionary tale. And Eloise, she went back to her garden, pruning her roses with the same care she had used to prune arrogance from a legacy her family refused to stain. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't post a thread. She simply walked out through a glass door and watched as the cracks spread behind her. The lobby of Jefferson and Rowe had never felt so still. Eloise Gardner walked through its marble halls with the same quiet grace she carried through decades of struggle and triumph. But today, something was different. There was an air around her that didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. Not through arrogance, but through presence. It was the kind of presence forged in fires unseen by the likes of Derek Vaughn. 2 days had passed since he'd flung her ID onto the cold floor like it was litter, and in those 2 days the Gardner women had moved with the precision of a symphony. Cameron had met with her legal counsel, restructured internal plans for the partnership's replacement, and combed through every public trace of Jefferson and Rowe's brand. Meanwhile, Eloise had done what she always did. She let the truth ferment. And when truth is ready, it no longer whispers, it thunders. At precisely 10 sure a.m., Cameron stepped into the same lobby with 3 of her executive advisors. All wore muted colors, perfectly tailored. Cameron's expression was unreadable stoic, with a glint of steel. Derek had been summoned to meet a strategic client in Conference Room A, the largest in the building, usually reserved for high-value deals and international dignitaries. His assistant had delivered the news with mild confusion. This wasn't in the schedule, but the board had made it clear. Promotion day. Derek muttered to himself, in the elevator straightening his tie. He stepped into the room just as the Gardner delegation took their seats. He froze. Cameron didn't stand to greet him. Eloise, however, offered a faint nod, the same motion she'd once used to dismiss men 3 times Derek's size in boardrooms 10 times as important. "Miss Gardner?" Mrs. Gardner," he stammered. Cameron's voice was calm and controlled. "Mr. Vaughn, thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." Derek obeyed, though every instinct screamed for escape. Cameron slid a folder across the table. "We'd like to discuss the terms of the proposed contract withdrawal." Derek blinked. I thought the agreement was moving forward." It was, Cameron said, "until we reviewed internal communications from your team, specifically your own emails regarding our company's qualifications." She opened her laptop and tapped a key. The screen behind her lit up with projected emails, the same condescending lines he'd sent, dismissing Helios Renewable Technologies as a media darling and calling Cameron PR fluff. The entire room could see them. Dated, signed, unambiguous. Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Cameron continued. "Your views on our leadership and our capacity to deliver value were made quite clear. What you failed to consider, however, was who you were actually speaking about." She turned to Eloise. "Allow me to reintroduce my grandmother, Eloise Gardner, co-founder of Gardner Electric in 1982. One of the first Black women to own and operate an energy firm in Illinois. Mentor to every woman in this room. And the reason I ever entered this business." Eloise tilted her head slightly, and for the first time addressed Derek directly. When you threw my ID on the floor, she said you weren't dismissing a stranger. You were revealing who you are. Derek's face turned pale. I didn't know. Eloise held up a hand. No. You didn't care to know. That's far worse. The legal advisor leaned forward. Per Clause 12.5, in the Ethics and Representation section, we are well within our rights to terminate all pending negotiations. Additionally, a formal ethics complaint will be filed with the National Banking Oversight Committee. The silence in the room was suffocating. Derek shifted in his chair, trying to summon any fragment of authority he once held. You're making a mistake. This contract is worth hundreds of millions. The bank, Cameron stood, will survive without our partnership. But I will not align our name with people who degrade my family and question our place in this industry. She picked up her briefcase. You should understand something, Mr. Vaughn. We are not asking for your validation. We are proving that we never needed it. Eloise rose beside her granddaughter. My generation fought to get in the room. Hers fights to decide who belongs there. As they turned to leave, Derek reached out desperate. Please, one mistake shouldn't. Cameron paused at the door. This wasn't one mistake. It was a window into your character, and we saw enough. They left the room together. Behind them, Derek sat alone, face in his hands, surrounded by his own words, projected larger than life, undeniable, unforgettable. The same arrogance that had made him powerful now made him pathetic. By the time Cameron and Eloise exited the building, word had already begun to spread. Someone in HR had leaked the meeting. Staff were whispering, connecting dots. Whispers turned to rumors. By the end of the day, everyone in the upper floors knew the woman Derek had humiliated was the grandmother of the CEO he had begged to keep. And the partnership, it wasn't just canceled, it was already replaced. Cameron had secured a more favorable deal with Horizon Equity, a firm led by a diverse board and known for its ethical track record. The new contract would push Helios into global expansion by next year. That night, Eloise and Cameron sat under the old oak tree in Eloise's backyard. The moonlight spilled across their faces as Cameron rested her head on her grandmother's shoulder. You knew this would happen, Cameron said. I hoped it would, Eloise replied. But I never depended on it. Cameron smiled faintly. You still teach me more in silence than most do with speeches. And in that quiet moment, beneath the branches that had shaded 3 generations, they both understood. Respect isn't earned through wealth or power. It's revealed in how you treat those you think you'll never need. And sometimes it's revealed too late. The morning sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Helios Renewable Technologies' executive conference room, catching flecks of dust like floating diamonds in the light. Eloise Gardner sat quietly at the far end of the long oak table, her back straight, her palms resting gently on a leather folder. She wore a deep navy suit, classic pearls at her neck, and a calm expression that belied the storm that was about to descend on Jefferson and Roe. Next to her, Cameron Gardner radiated composed authority, her voice low but clear as she ran over the agenda for the emergency board meeting she'd called just 48 hours earlier. We've reached a critical juncture, Cameron said, turning to the members of the board. The integrity of our partnerships is not a peripheral issue. It defines the soul of this company. The board, made up of seasoned executives, venture capitalists, and sustainability experts, had gathered with minimal notice. Some were concerned, others intrigued, but all of them knew something unusual was coming. When Cameron called for an unscheduled board vote, people listened. Eloise hadn't said a word yet. She didn't need to. Her presence was its own statement, a living testament to the company's legacy and the quiet fire beneath the surface. Cameron continued. 2 days ago, our family encountered a situation at Jefferson and Rowe that revealed troubling insight into how they treat prospective partners, especially those who don't fit their assumptions. That experience isn't just personal, it's systemic. A few murmurs rippled down the table. Cameron clicked a remote, and the projection screen came to life behind her. Screenshots, emails, Slack conversations, all meticulously documented proof of bias, sarcasm, and dismissiveness from Jefferson's senior account executive, Derek Vaughn. Most of the board had seen some of this already in the report she'd circulated privately, but now it was real, undeniable, and being aired in a room where decisions were made. Cameron's voice didn't rise, but it tightened. This wasn't an isolated misjudgment. It was a culture in plain view. She looked to the right, where Marcus Linton, Chief Financial Officer, sat flipping through the folder of evidence. Marcus, would you walk us through the contingency scenario? Marcus nodded. Standing. If we cancel the Jefferson and Rowe deal, we lose a 3-week delay in the green energy rollout and incur an initial breach penalty of 2.3% on the contract value. But we've been in active talks with Horizon Equity. They've offered us better terms, greater flexibility, and a team that actually reflects the communities we serve. He turned the page. Financially, we'd not only recover within a year, we'd outperform our projected trajectory. One board member raised a skeptical eyebrow. This feels drastic. Shouldn't we give Jefferson a chance to course correct? Eloise finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but its impact was immediate. Respect is not something you retroactively grant after a press scandal, she said. It's either there from the start, or it isn't. And if they didn't see the humanity in a 67-year-old black woman standing in front of them with a valid ID and a business proposal, they won't see the worth of our entire company either. Not unless it benefits them. A silence settled. It wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Cameron stepped beside her grandmother. We're not asking for perfection in our partners, but we are demanding alignment with our values. Diversity, equity, dignity. Those aren't slogans in our mission statement. They're the foundation we built this company on. And if we stay in business with people who discard those principles the moment it's inconvenient, then we become complicit. She took a breath, scanning the room. I'm calling for a formal board vote to terminate the Jefferson and Rowe partnership and finalize the transition to Horizon Equity. Chairs shifted, pens tapped. Then the motion was opened. One by one, hands went up. Yes, yes, yes. When the last vote was cast, it was unanimous. Cameron nodded, calm on the outside, heart pounding beneath. It was done. Outside the room, Cameron's assistant was already on the phone with Horizon Equity. Inside, Eloise finally exhaled, then turned to her granddaughter with the hint of a proud smile. I knew you'd carry the torch farther than I ever could. Cameron laughed softly, her eyes glassy. Only because you lit the first match. Later that afternoon, the boardroom sat empty again, but its energy lingered like an echo. Cameron walked through the lobby of Helios with Eloise at her side. News of the decision was already circulating through industry circles, sending shockwaves not just through Jefferson and Rowe, but the broader corporate world. Cameron stopped by the front desk, speaking to her assistant. Send an official letter to Jefferson. Make it clear that while we appreciate their previous efforts, their values no longer align with ours. And to Mr. Vaughn, the assistant asked. Cameron looked to Eloise. Send him a note, Eloise said. Simple. Tell him thank you for reminding us why we built this company in the first place. And with that, they stepped into the sunlight, not as victims, not as women who had been disrespected, but as architects of change, leaders of a movement that said, you cannot silence power when it comes wrapped in quiet dignity. What they had just done was more than a decision, it was a declaration, a message to every company watching. If you fail to respect the people you think you can ignore, you may wake up one day and find your entire empire has been built on quicksand. And the people you look down on, they'll be the ones handing you the rope. The conference room had emptied hours ago, but Eloise Gardner still sat quietly in the soft glow of the city lights outside the panoramic windows. Cameron stood at the far end of the room, her silhouette reflected in the glass as she looked out over Atlanta's skyline. There was no applause, no ceremony, just the thick silence that always followed a moment of irreversible transformation. Eloise finally spoke, her voice thoughtful and calm. You know, when I was your age, I walked into boardrooms through service doors. Not because I wasn't qualified, but because people couldn't imagine someone like me sitting at the table. Cameron turned, moved by the weight of that memory. And now you open those same doors for people who never dreamed they'd be allowed in. A soft smile played across Eloise's face. That's the real success. Not the contracts, not the balance sheets, but who we make room for. Outside Helios headquarters, the evening buzzed with life protests 2 blocks down, advocating for inclusive hiring practices. A mural unveiling that celebrated women in leadership, and inside the heart of the company, a new memo was being distributed. Effective immediately, all strategic partnerships must pass an internal review for cultural alignment, community representation, and demonstrated inclusivity. It wasn't a marketing move. It was the new heartbeat of the company. The ripple effect began faster than anyone expected. Cameron's LinkedIn post, short, unapologetic, and firm, went viral in less than a day. We do not do business with those who discard dignity. Our partnerships reflect our values. Respect is not a bonus, it's a baseline. Within 48 hours, industry publications were running headlines. The Gardner line drawn in stone, when integrity costs 2.6% and pays off in billions. Competitor banks scrambled to revise internal policies. HR departments initiated new sensitivity training programs. Diversity officers received urgent meeting requests from CEOs. Something had shifted. Anderson Vaughn, the man who had once thrown Eloise's ID card with the grace of a judge handing down a sentence, quietly resigned. He released a statement, vague and corporate. But the world had already moved on. Meanwhile, Eloise wasn't interested in his apology. She was interested in momentum. The next morning, she stood in a sun-filled classroom at a community college in Decatur, speaking to a room of first-generation business students. When you walk into a room and someone questions why you're there, remember this. Their doubt says more about their vision than your value. You don't need permission to belong. A student raised her hand, her voice trembling slightly. But what if we're afraid? Afraid of saying the wrong thing or not being enough? Eloise smiled softly. Fear means you're stepping outside of what the world has tried to limit you to. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of change. Back at Helios Cameron's, leadership began redefining not just the company's trajectory, but its legacy. She launched an initiative in her grandmother's name, the Gardner Fellowship, a program offering mentorship and seed funding to underrepresented entrepreneurs. The first class filled in a week. One of the first fellows was a single mother building a fintech app for underserved Black communities. Another, a former factory worker, creating eco-friendly housing prototypes. Each of them carried Eloise's legacy forward. No statues needed, just actions that resonated like echoes through every glass ceiling she had cracked. The media coverage continued, but Cameron remained grounded. She knew this wasn't about being praised, it was about being responsible. Every interview, she redirected the focus. We didn't cancel a deal. We stood by a principle. At home, in her grandmother's modest living room, filled with jazz vinyl and framed photos from decades of activism, Cameron and Eloise sat with mugs of peppermint tea, finally exhaling. You didn't just teach me how to build, Cameron said. You taught me when to walk away. Eloise looked at her with a quiet pride. And you showed me something even greater, that all the doors we've opened, all the rooms we've entered, it wasn't just for us. It was for the ones who never even knew there was a door. The gardeners didn't need to raise their voices to change the world. They simply kept walking forward with their dignity intact, their legacy alive, and their motion unstoppable. In the heart of Atlanta's financial district, what began as a quiet act of humiliation in a bank lobby became a firestorm that transformed not only one corporation, but echoed across an entire industry. The story of Eloise Gardner, a 67-year-old Black woman, retired entrepreneur and mother to Cameron Gardner, CEO of Helios Global, was never about revenge. It was about the enduring power of dignity. When Eloise walked into Sterling Equity Bank, she wasn't expecting red carpets or applause. She came with modest paperwork and a simple request. But the moment her ID was tossed on the marble floor, like discarded mail, by an arrogant executive named Anderson Vaughn, the truth revealed itself, not about Eloise, but about the institution she stood before. The executive didn't see her wisdom, experience, or humanity. He saw a stereotype, one he believed had no place in his pristine glass-walled world. What he didn't know was that the woman he disrespected had once built and sold one of the most respected logistics companies in the Southeast. He didn't know that her daughter Cameron was finalizing a $2.6 billion partnership with his bank. And perhaps most importantly, he didn't know that Eloise was a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to change the room. What followed wasn't a press release. It wasn't a social media scandal. It was a deliberate strategic unraveling of arrogance. Cameron and Eloise didn't just walk away. They walked with purpose, terminating the contract and taking their billions to a more ethical institution. But they also did something even more profound. They used the experience as fuel to shift culture. From internal reforms at Helios to the launch of the Gardner Fellowship for underrepresented entrepreneurs, the humiliation Eloise endured became the seed of systemic transformation. The story didn't end in a boardroom, it began there. It spread into classrooms, into mentorship programs, into national conversations about what real leadership looks like and what respect should mean in professional spaces. Anderson Vaughn lost his job, yes, but more significantly, he became a cautionary tale. Not because of one mistake, but because he acted from a place of habitual bias. He judged a woman by her appearance and assumed his position made him immune to consequences. He forgot one timeless truth: power without empathy is hollow, and respect is never optional. It's fundamental. So what's the lesson? This story is not just about Eloise or Cameron. It's about all of us. It's about what we choose to see when someone unfamiliar walks through our doors. It's about the small decisions that reveal our true character, whether we choose to elevate or to diminish, to listen or to dismiss. In today's world, where unconscious bias still shapes boardroom decisions and casual prejudice hides behind professional smiles, Eloise's story is a powerful reminder that integrity matters, and that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't retaliation, it's elevation, building, mentoring, choosing values over vengeance. We must ask ourselves, are we creating environments where every client, every employee, every stranger is treated with the respect they deserve before we know their title, their net worth, or their connections? Because behind every ID card, behind every worn coat or unfamiliar face, there could be a legacy, a lesson, a leader. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own worth, or inspired you to see others differently, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to our channel. Support stories that shine a light on the power of dignity, resilience, and justice. Help us continue sharing the narratives that too often go unheard but deserve to be remembered. Because the next story might be yours, and the world needs to hear it.